it can be a little bit like making these affirmations about what you want to call into your life. Well, first of all, everything that's not in alignment with that needs to be shifted out of your life first. Okay, I'll talk about the mechanics of that later as we go through this conversation. You have set your intention with as much purity as you're able to, as much alignment that you're able to, with your North Star, which is your soul truth. We're in this beautiful held container that's held by a shaman or a teacher or a guide. And we receive those energies and we can feel really good. Our vibration rises to meet that of the person who's holding the space for us. What happens is when we leave that space and we go back into our own environment, those vibrations are no longer external to us, are no longer a match for what we have going on internally. So we can feel a drop. Welcome. I'm Tania Aurora Whitecrow, and I work as a shamanka, which is a Northern European term for a shamanic medicine woman. And today I'm going to talk about integration and the importance of integration. And integration really is the end of a process, whether that's one of initiation, healing, an attunement, or transmission. And before we have those experiences, we may also set an intention. And the integration process starts after we've received that initiation, transmission, healing, or whatever that may be. And depending on what your intention is, that alignment with your soul, and the process, the ceremony, the healing, the initiation that you've been involved with can depend on how long that takes for that integration to unfold. So in something like a vision quest, it may be 2 years. It may be even longer, but the changes will be more profound in the days and weeks afterwards and become more subtle over time. So let's look at intention setting first. Okay, I'm really, really big on intention setting. Those who've worked with me will know that, and I can link a blog post below for you to look at that I send out in some form to all of my clients, those attending my courses and groups, because it is so important. It's like your North Star that sets your course and your direction, and the ease of your integration can really be dependent on that intention that you're setting. How aligned is that with your soul, and how much ego interference is there within that? Those of you who are familiar with affirmations, you know, making these affirmations and about what you want to call into your life. Well, first of all, everything that's not in alignment with that needs to be shifted out of your life first. And so this is why sometimes people feel affirmations don't work. You know, if you're affirming for love, and everything that is not love will leave first. Okay, I'll talk about the mechanics of that later as we go through this conversation. So we're going to first look at that energetic patterning. You have set your intention with as much purity as you're able to, as much alignment that you're able to, with your North Star, which is your soul truth. Okay, that which guides you through life. There's a beautiful saying that was brought through by the Buddhist monk Thich Nhat Hanh, who talks through that the North Star is our guide. You know, that is what guides us through our life. We never expect to reach the North Star, but it guides us. Okay, so that's a reminder of that attachment to outcome and expectations of what this may look like after we have gone through that process. So I mentioned initiation. So first I'll outline what I mean by initiations. There can be many shamanic indigenous traditions where there are more formal, recognized initiations. They can be ones of lived experience. So adolescence, getting married, getting divorced, these thresholds in our life that create immense change. They are also initiations into something new, okay, a new phase of our life. And we can struggle with them when they're not formally recognized in some way. Initiations can also be training that we have with the teacher if we're training to, whether it's shamanic training or some other form of an energy modality, because then we are receiving a new way of being in the world. Okay, so we are opening ourselves up to that. Attunements, again, they're kind of in alignment with being attuned to certain energies, which is what I was talking about with when we experience trainings. And healings are also, especially, you know, energetic, shamanic healings also work in a similar way, perhaps in a sort of smaller way, if you like, depending on what it is you're calling in and what it is your soul and your guides feel is best for you at that moment in time. So they can be subtle or they can be more profound and transformative. They're always transformative, but the way we experience that transformation can vary depending on what we're ready for. There's another component to that I do want to address, because sometimes a healing can open us up to integrating other healings we may not have fully integrated. What I go through will explain that more fully. Okay. So with all of this work, what happens, we are looking to align with something that is more higher vibrational. And to do that, that means we need to shift the denser blockages out of our lives that don't vibrate at that frequency. Okay, so things that are dense have a lower vibration than things that are higher frequency. So we're looking at those more beneficial, joy, love, and those kind of feelings and emotions, that lightness that comes. So it's like the reverse of displacement theory in physics. So those of you who are not familiar with displacement theory, there's this, if there's some water and you drop stones into it, the surface of the water will rise and it will flow out of the container. Okay, what we're doing, if you like, the human condition has created that. Okay, so we've had lots of stones and blockages that have been dropped into our container, and that has caused a lot of that lightness and that expansiveness to leave. And that's throughout the history of humanity, not necessarily in our lifetime. And part of what we want to do when we go to healing is to remove those blockages so that our container can just be filled with that pure crystalline liquid, that water. Okay. And so this can be likened to something else. If you shake a jar, say a jar of coffee, or sometimes say mixed nuts or something like that, so you'll find that the bigger ones will rise to the surface. And it's like, why would that happen? Because they're the bigger ones, so they're heavier. So why would they rise to the surface? And the shaking represents that vibration. Okay, so what happens when you're vibrating it at a certain frequency that's more aligned with the smaller particles and the lighter particles, they will just drop through to the bottom, allowing the denser energies to rise up to the surface, the denser coffee grains or nuts, okay, to rise up to the surface. So this is what we can be referring to is when we talk about also separating the wheat from the chaff. It's that separation process, that shaking process that shifts the vibration to enable that to happen so that we can start to bring in more higher beneficial frequencies. Okay. So this is what happens, is we receive these new energies. They come into our system when we're in this beautiful held container that's held by a shaman or a teacher or a guide. And we receive those energies and we can feel really good. You know, our vibration rises to meet that of the person who's holding the space for us. What happens is when we leave that space and we go back into our own environment, whether that's an energetic space or a physical space, those vibrations are no longer external to us, are no longer a match for what we have going on internally. So we can feel a drop. So we can feel ourselves feeling worse for a while because we've had this beautiful experience of lightness, and yet there's not a match necessarily for that in our environment, in our external environment. And what can happen as well is that also, because that new energy is coming in, those things that we hold within our physical vessels, within our bodies, whether they're, you know, energetic components, are also starting to leave our bodies. And that can be uncomfortable. We can experience that physically, and that's why very often part of the integration process is about watching your diets, drinking lots of water, taking salt baths and foot baths and things like that to just help with that detoxification process. That is a very real part of what is happening. So as part of the integration, as you're starting to integrate and embody more of those new frequencies, and you have this real discomfort of what doesn't align with that leaving your physical vessel in the ways that it does. And part of your work is in integration is to maintain that alignment with those frequencies that your intention called in for you, and that your soul has also agreed to call in for you. And part of allowing that, as those denser energies are leaving, is about, we may have a sense of re-experiencing that. We may find these old stories that we're trying to shift start to play out in our external reality. And it takes a lot to really hold our intention and to recognize what is happening and to allow them to leave, which may be subtle, but it can also be experienced as something dramatic. With those that I've worked with, I'm aware of both ends of the spectrum as well as everything in between happening with people. So I go back to the affirmations, what we were saying about affirmations. So now you have a better idea of the mechanics of affirmations. You know, we're calling in, you know, a divine love. Well, everything that is not divine love will start to leave your life if you continue with that affirmation. And you may just feel that you're just left with yourself and your soul, because that is the purity of divine love. Okay. So there is this responsibility to, as you align with your intention, to be aware of what it is you're letting go and allow that to leave, and what it is what you're still holding on to. And there are choice points within that. If it feels really dramatic and abrupt, maybe because there may be several layers leaving at the same time, there could be a choice to say, well, I'm not ready to complete this in this way. Can we just ease it, make it with grace and ease it out a bit? Okay, so this is when we may find that what happens is that some of those energetic patterns will leave, the obvious ones, and we might still see the more subtle versions of that playing out within our reality. But through going through that first layer, or the first couple of layers, we're more aware of it. We can recognize that. So we're able to then address that ourselves. By integrating that, we become more empowered. And so we can see things differently. And so we can do that work for ourselves without the necessary addition of going back for another healing session or the support of a mentor. We may prefer that. Okay, that's personal choice. But a new clarity will arrive. So we still have a choice, even at that point of integration, of how deeply we want to align with it, or if we want it to be eased out. And this brings me back to another point that I made earlier, and that is sometimes what can happen. Sometimes people can have a massive integration because they may still have pockets of those previous healings that haven't been integrated, and suddenly they're ready to receive all of it. And it can be a very big experience, but they are ready for that. So knowing that you're ready to receive that, and it's staying in your center and recognizing what's leaving, recognizing that's what's happening may not just be because of the healing that you've just had, or the initiation you've just had, or the training you've just had. It could go back to experiences and other occurrences that you had 7 years previously, and it's still all playing out. So there is no time when it comes to energy. There is no separation. There is that negotiation that happens in the subtle realms, and it takes a lot of courage. It takes a lot of courage to make changes, even if they're changes that we want to make, because that is when the work comes in. It's the integration is where our part of that work comes in, because any healing process, any initiation, it is a co-creation between you and the person who has guided you through that. Is always in co-creation, and with your own soul and with your own spirit teams. Okay, so there will be this sort of reorganization that occurs both within yourself and then outside of yourself, that can happen in a massive leap. It can happen in small steps. Okay, and how do we know when one of these processes have completed, or at least completed for now? There is a sense of reaching a plateau, so we can have that initial experience of receiving the energy that we need to, that we have committed to aligning with, so that we can shift what it is we want to shift in our lives. And then there's that process of what that looks like in our reality, and negotiating and integrating how we can work through that, whether it is in a big leap or lots of small steps. Okay, and then there will be this sense of reaching a plateau. Doesn't necessarily mean it's complete, because in some senses this work is never complete, but there will be a sense of reaching a plateau where you're aware that you have integrated the bulk of that work for now. Okay. And the other important thing with integration is allowing the time for that. I know I've said there's no real time, okay, but allowing the process. So when there's that constant reaching out for more, you are not allowing the process to occur. That creates confusion within your fields. And as I was saying earlier about, we might not integrate every component of a healing or initiation immediately in the days and weeks afterwards. There may be other aspects and other components that will come in later. So if you're constantly reaching out for more, there'll be kind of a stasis, because if you're not integrating enough of what you've already requested, and you're creating this sort of confusion, and instead of sitting in that in empowerment, and I already said the courage that that takes, and that that sense of self and your ability to be able to do this work, then it'll kind of put it on hold, you know. So consider a guide or a healer or whoever is supporting you as like a trigger for your own process of self-empowerment. The more you do this work at the pace that is right for you, the more you kind of create your own ability to do this work. So you become familiar with the process and you start to be able to do more for yourself. And this is also what initiation and integration will teach you, is your own healing power and ability. Because you know, afterwards, you're the one who's having to step up and do the work. And that's why this energy work or healing work or any personal growth work is essentially about that self-empowerment. I hope you found that supportive. Link other resources below that might be supportive of you. I would really appreciate your support if you could subscribe or click like or comment if you have any questions. I'd really appreciate hearing from you. Okay, thank you. Sending you much love from my heart to yours.